So we'll just go over a few announcements here, and then we'll have two great speakers tonight, Himanshu from AdTech and Daniel from Atlassian. Then after the sessions, we will have some raffles, so do stay till the end here. And then afterwards, we will have an open discussion session here. So if you have any questions, either to the speakers or just to your fellow community members, feel free to chime in at the end there. And of course, the raffles, we want to always thank our sponsors. So I want to thank AdTech, Blended Perspectives, Major Key, which actually is a rebranding of Column Technologies. Some of you folks may be familiar. They're a pretty big major Atlassian ecosystem partner. And then eCore for the gifts. And then I just want to also wish congratulations to our winners from our last time. So just to note, if you won last time, you're not eligible this time, just to give an opportunity to everyone else to win a prize. So Araf, I see you there, so sorry. Come the next time.
See, there's no reason for me to stay then. So.
You're coming for the content, and I guess that,
and the virtual food,
yes.
Virtual sushi, got it.
So just a quick note of our online community. This doesn't end here tonight. So as I'm sure most of you folks are familiar with the Atlassian website here to answer Q&A, but we also do have like a New York City presence website page there. So if you want to continue asking any questions to the group or just trying to chime in or comment, feel free to join our community group as well. Okay. So with that, let's go on to the speakers. So our first speaker is Himanshu. He's kind of an old hat here and spoken many times in the past at our New York City group. It's kind of really technical presentations. I'm sure you'll enjoy this one, which is on DevSecOps, which again, I think has become a pretty big buzzword. So he'll give us some tips and strategies of how to implement that in your software delivery process. So with that, take it away, Himanshu.
Yeah, thanks for the intro, Dilip. Let me share my screen. All right, is my screen visible? Looks good. All right. Yep. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining today. And today I'm going to talk about implementing DevSecOps within the Atlassian ecosystem. I'll also probably be mentioning a few non-Atlassian tools as well, because of how broad the ecosystem really is, both for DevOps as well as DevSecOps. So before I get into the core content, just a brief intro. I'm part of AdTech. And AdTech is an Atlassian Platinum Solution Partner, we've been in business for more than 13 years at this point. We provide Atlassian tools implementation and DevOps services. We are also an Atlassian marketplace vendor. And as for myself, I have been at AdTech for 10 years this July, I've worn like many hats, but my core focus has been providing support to a lot of our medium-sized to enterprise-scale customers, across pre-sales, implementation, and I've also done some bit of post-implementation support. So the agenda at a high level for today is, we'll define the problem statement more in terms of what is the cost of remediating security vulnerabilities in the source code within your organization, and how DevSecOps is a really good framework to solve the problem of reducing the cost of remediating these security issues, as well as improving the overall information security hygiene of your projects. We'll dive briefly into one of our customer case studies, just to give you a realistic example of what does this look like in the real world when we implement or when we help some of our customers implement this. And then we'll recap with some major takeaways. So in terms of the cost of remediating security vulnerabilities, now when we talk about information security, it is a very broad discipline. Right? And even within information security, there is this specific area which is application security, which is basically how do you secure the source code that is inside of your organization, because as we know, a lot of companies, regardless of what vertical they are part of, they have become software companies, knowingly or unknowingly. They have to write code to constantly innovate. But with this innovation also comes a slew of problems. In the news, we keep hearing about all of these high-profile data breaches and security breaches. both in the at the government level as well as in private organizations. It's a pretty major issue at this point. But if we look at the way to prevent this, especially when you are writing code and creating software, is you really need to remediate. You need to discover and remediate the security vulnerabilities as early as possible. Because if you discover these very late, it becomes very expensive. So for example, if you find out about a security breach, by hearing it from the press due to like a data leak or to someone else reporting about it, obviously, right, there's a lot of damage to your organization's reputation and customer confidence. If you are part of a regulated industry like finance or healthcare, there are some very strict regulations, which also include monetary fine. But now these are the things that could be beyond your control if these breaches happen. But the things that are under your control are making sure that you are able to discover the security vulnerabilities as early as possible in the development process. And even if we zoom into the development process and look at the infographic that I have up on the screen right now, it's discovered that even if you find these security vulnerabilities very close to the time when you are deploying your code to the production or customer environment, it might be a bit late already, because sometimes it may take weeks or even months to remediate these issues when you find it so close to the release. Or in some cases, you are going to even have to get an exception because you really cannot move the release date. The release has to go out on a particular date. But then you're taking a lot of risk. And also, when you go back to the dev team and ask them to analyze this potential security vulnerability and fix it, it can take a long time. And again, time equates to money. So it ends up becoming very expensive for your organization. So the next thing might be that you might say that we do a number of application security and source code checks during our QA or testing process, which is obviously way better than discovering these issues in production or post-production. But even discovering these during the QA or testing process is not ideal, because it can take days or weeks to again go back to the dev team, fix this issue, go back to QA, run your entire regression tests and standard testing process, as well as checking to see if that security vulnerability is present or not. So that's not ideal as well. So the most ideal place to discover and remediate potential security vulnerabilities in your source code is during the development process itself. And this is enabled by a lot of modern technologies that the developers have now access to. One example of that is that even within the IDE or code editor that developers use, like IntelliJ or Eclipse or Visual Studio Code, those IDEs or code editors have integration with different application security tools that can run source code scans and can give the developer some instant feedback as they are writing the code. So for example, if the developer wrote a block of code or even a line of code that potentially introduces some security issue, then the plugin within their IDE will warn them, saying that, hey, you might be introducing this very particular type of vulnerability, and some of those tools might even give you a link to the documentation showing examples of how to remediate it. So that's the first line of defense that you can have, you ideally should have for your developers. But then again, developers may miss it, or they may overlook these issues even when they are getting warnings within their IDE. So the next level of defense you have is that once the developers submit the source code, ideally your continuous integration process, when it's running the automated build process for the code changes that the developer submitted, ideally that should also discover a lot of these potential security issues in the source code changes. And this is only possible if you integrate a lot of these application security scans and checks as part of the continuous integration, continuous deployment, CI/CD process. It's now considered pretty standard to have a CI/CD process for any team that's writing code or creating software. And as part of the CI/CD process, traditionally you would only build the source code, you would run your unit tests and integration tests and any other kinds of tests. But what's really considered the best practice based on current standards is to also run a lot of the application security scans and checks that is enabled by different tools and technologies. And we'll talk about some of those a bit later. And then in terms of more of a mind shift, right, or a change in the overall behavior of how you approach security within the context of software development, there is a new term that's a bit of a buzzword, but is gaining a bit of popularity these days, and that term is DevSecOps. So if you had to define DevSecOps, you'll find a lot of different definitions out there. The definition I really like is from the Atlassian site. So Atlassian has a lot of good, microsites like for Agile and for DevOps and a few other topics. But if you search for Atlassian DevSecOps, you'll find a page like a subsection under the Atlassian DevOps part of their website. And over there, they've defined DevSecOps as the practice of integrating security into a continuous integration, continuous delivery, and continuous deployment pipeline. And that's something we'll dive a bit deeper into. And then they also go on to say that by incorporating DevOps values into software security, security verification becomes an active integrated part of the development process. And I really like this definition. I think it's pretty straightforward and self-explanatory. But looking at the infographic that I again took from the Atlassian DevSecOps page, you'll see that a lot of these facets of DevSecOps are divided into two broad categories. So on one side, you have sort of checks and balances that you can perform during pre-production. And then on the other side, you have the checks that is typically run once the application is already running or deployed in production. In today's talk, we'll talk more about things that you can control at the pre-production level, but there are some emerging sort of best practices and technologies that also enable you to also monitor the security and the sort of the attack vectors and actively defend against those, even when the application is already deployed in production. But in the pre-production environment, you have control over the source code, like we talked about. You can scan your source code using different techniques to find potential security vulnerabilities. You can also analyze the build, and this is also sometimes called the software component analysis. Also sometimes called the software bill of materials, which is basically determining what are the different components that make up your software. These days, no one writes code from scratch. Right? You use a lot of third-party libraries, especially open source libraries, when you are writing code. So it's not really necessary to secure the code that you're writing yourself, but you also are at the mercy of the security or insecurity of the third-party components or libraries that you're using. So in terms of the more specific types of checks that we'll talk about today, when you're analyzing the source code within your project, there are a few major types. So the first one is static analysis. And static analysis is basically a technique where some kind of specialized code scanning tool will analyze the source code of your project without actually running the code. So just looking at the way you're writing the code, the structure of your code to find potential security vulnerabilities. One example of that might be that if a developer has hard-coded some API keys or passwords as part of the source code of their project, then a static analysis tool will when it analyzes that source code, it can create an alert saying that you really should not be hard coding these sensitive values. And then the other area is software composition analysis that we talked about, where you're analyzing the libraries and open source dependencies of your project. And then there's also something called dynamic analysis, which is you run the application typically in a test environment, and then you try to simulate real-world attacks like cross-site scripting or SQL injection to try to see if you are able to successfully run an attack vector. And then it will sort of the specialized tool that runs these checks can then create a report around whether you might be potentially vulnerable to these attack vectors. And there are a lot of other kinds of checks as well. So in terms of a more realistic example, so we'll talk about one of our customers. We can't name the customer directly, but this customer is a Fortune 500 company. They are a large corporate investment banking company with a global presence, and they have thousands of software projects. Now, not all of these software projects is custom code. They have a lot of legacy code. They have third-party tools that they run, and then obviously also a good number of software projects that they created internally. They also have a lot of sort of hybrid projects where they may take a third-party tool or vendor tool, but they may create specific customizations or plugins for those third-party tools, which also introduces source code and also introduces the possibility of having vulnerabilities in the source code. And the problem statement, the problem that this customer had when we initially engaged with them was that just the sheer volume of source code that they had. And they already had a good number of application security tools in place, like the static analysis, the dynamic analysis, sorry, excuse me, and also the software composition analysis and many other checks. But the problem was that these checks were not run as part of the CI/CD pipeline. Some of these checks were run at the discretion of the developers and the dev teams, and some teams were really good at running these checks themselves and remediating the issues. In other cases, the application security team had to run these checks and then go behind the dev team if they find any sort of critical or blocker issues in terms of potential security vulnerabilities. And this was not ideal at all, because on one side you have a lot of these scans and checks being run manually, which is time consuming, especially because a lot of these scans can take a while. Some of these scans could take minutes, while some could even take hours, depending on the complexity of the project. And then also there was a lot of manual back and forth between the application security support team and the dev team, which is both inefficient as well as expensive. If you're doing a lot of these manual back and forth, manual scans, all of this adds up, especially in such a large organization with a lot of developers and a lot of different software projects. And the side effect of this was that this also led to not everything getting scanned, especially not on time. Because it's not really feasible to scan every code change, especially very early on in the development process. So if security vulnerabilities are discovered pretty close to production, then you either have to get an exception or you have to rush to fix it in order to meet the release date, which puts everyone under stress. And then the other is that reporting was a major challenge, especially because each of these application security scanning tools has their own interface and their own reports. But when it comes to the developers, they did not have a single location where they could get a consolidated view of the application security health of their projects. And it was quite a challenge to sort of context switch between multiple tools to try to keep up with understanding what's going on. Now, in terms of the solution, we'll approach it with two different ways. The first is we'll talk about how you could implement a solution for an organization with a sort of similar kind of problem using mostly an Atlassian tool stack. So in the Atlassian tool stack, you would typically be using Bitbucket as your version control tool of choice. So the developers would be submitting code to their Git repositories in Bitbucket. And ideally, as soon as any kind of source code is submitted to Bitbucket, that should automatically trigger the CI/CD process or the build pipeline. And you could be using Bamboo if you are using the Atlassian Data Center or self-hosted suite of tools. Or if you are on the Atlassian cloud, then you could be using Bitbucket Cloud, not only for managing your Git repositories for version control, but also Bitbucket Cloud has the build pipelines feature built in. So you would also be using Bitbucket as your CI/CD tool of choice in the cloud. And all of these tools would also be integrated with Jira. some of you who might be using some of these tools might be familiar that there are built-in integrations between all of the Atlassian dev tools along with Jira software. And as part of your CI/CD pipeline, regardless of what tool you use, what you need to do is, or you need to ensure that all of the application security scans are run automatically whenever your build pipeline is running. And this is important because this is the only way you can enforce that every code change has an application security scan associated with it. If you don't have something like this, the problem will be that it's just not feasible to ensure that every code change is scanned and analyzed. However, with a sort of more naive implementation of this approach, there are some other issues. The major issue being that, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of these application security scans can take a while to run. So for example, if your project scan takes like a few hours to finish running, the developers will be sort of waiting for the build to complete, which is not ideal at all. So our approach or recommendation is that you should run these scans asynchronously rather than running them in a sort of more synchronous or sort of step-by-step manner. A lot of the CI/CD tools allow you to also parallelize your steps, where instead of running one test after the other, or one application security scan after the other in a serial manner, you can parallelize them depending on the CI/CD tool you use. And also, a lot of these application security scanning tools provide command line clients, which you can use to kick off the scans for the source code in your project, and then you should also be able to run those in a asynchronous manner. Once these scans finish running, they need to report these findings. And ideally, you want these findings to go directly to the developers and the dev team. You don't want it to go to some other tool then that the developers have to reference. And developers, as you know, live within Jira software when they're in the Atlassian ecosystem. So you need to utilize the integration that most of these application security tools have with Jira software. A lot of the leading ones out there, they have official Jira software apps in the Atlassian marketplace that will automatically create issues for significant findings. And when it comes to application security, you may have some false positives or more some low severity findings. So ideally, you don't want to create a lot of noise by creating Jira issues for everything. You ideally only want to create Jira issues for potential security or vulnerability issues that breach a certain threshold, like for something with critical or blocker type of severities. And this is something that's possible by using sort of this framework, as well as a lot of the built-in features that these application security scanning tools have, including their integration with Jira software. Now, in terms of this particular customer, they have been using Jira software for quite a while. However, in terms of the version control tool of choice, they use GitLab. And not only do they use GitLab for version control, but also that is their tool of choice for CI/CD. However, again, the framework still holds, because again, every code change that goes through the version control system has a build associated with it as part of the build pipeline, and the build pipeline would asynchronously run all of the application security scans, and all of those findings would be reported to Jira software. So even in the case of this customer, even though they were not using sort of 100% Atlassian stack like we saw in the previous slide, the framework still worked, and it made a significant difference in the underlying problems that I highlighted earlier. So earlier, I talked about the four main categories of problems they had, which was the manual scans, the missing scans, and then obviously all of this manual work and manual back and forth creates a lot of expense, or it becomes a more inefficient and expensive process. And then reporting was hindered because of the fact that they were using a lot of different types of application security scanning tools for different categories, and there was no centralized way to get all the results. And after we implemented the framework that we talked about, we ensured that there were the scans were automated. The developers did not need to do anything at all. Once they configured their build pipeline as a one-time task, and anytime they make a code change, it would run the regular build pipeline as well as kick off those asynchronous application security scans, which once done, they would report back to Jira. And this was a major boost in efficiency and reduce a lot of effort and cost. And this helped achieve 100% scan coverage. And there was no way you could avoid these application security scans for the source code. And then in terms of reporting, the reporting issue is solved because, like I said, a lot of these tools have, the application security scanning tools have apps and integrations with Jira software. And they typically just automatically create Jira software issues. And I'll show you some examples from the Atlassian marketplace. So the Atlassian marketplace, one of the application security scanning tools that has a Jira app is Veracode. Veracode is probably one of the leading application security scanning tools, especially in the enterprise. And this is an example of a Jira issue that gets created automatically based on the sort of static analysis of the source code in your project. And in this case, it created a Jira issue, it applied different labels, and it also created a very verbose description of the vulnerability. And a lot of the times, the developers can just look at the Jira issue, and that itself gives them enough hint to solve this issue. If not, they can look up the details of that particular class of vulnerability. Nexus IQ is another very popular application security scanning tool that is used. And they also have official Jira integration, and you can see the screenshot of what that Jira issue may look like. And in this case, Nexus IQ is analyzing the open source dependencies of your project. And here we can see that it found an issue with a very popular Java library called Apache Collections. And it mentioned that the particular version of Apache Collections that you're using in your project has a pretty severe vulnerability that can be fixed by upgrading the library, most likely. So far, I mostly talked about more of a self-hosted environment, and especially as it pertains to sort of the Atlassian data center suite of tools that you might be running, as well as even the application security scanning tools could be self-hosted, for example, Nexus IQ. But as we know, cloud is the future. A lot of organizations are moving to the cloud, even though that movement is a bit conservative on the enterprise side. But regardless, Atlassian has poised itself for success in the cloud in all categories, and that also includes DevOps and DevSecOps. One such example is that Atlassian also has partnered with this cloud-based application security scanning tool called Snyk. And if you look up Jira software Snyk, they have some pretty good examples of the types of integration that you can create, especially with Bitbucket Cloud, since on the Atlassian cloud side, you would most likely prefer to use Bitbucket Cloud as your CI/CD pipeline tool of choice. Apart from that, there is also a new initiative by Atlassian called Atlassian Open DevOps Initiative. So if you look up Atlassian Open DevOps Initiative, you'll find Atlassian landing page. And Atlassian has full-on embraced the idea that Atlassian integrates with all of these different DevOps tools, and also increasingly the DevSecOps and application security scanning tools out there. So you can sort of mix and match. Right? You can take the Atlassian solution, and then you can take different application security solutions from different vendors to create your preferred solution. Atlassian is providing a way to for your organization to customize it according to your preference and needs. One other thing I'd like to highlight is that some organization that we've worked with, the question they have is, can we reduce or consolidate the number of application security tools? And this is growing pain for some of the organizations, because the types of application security scans you have to do, the categories are ever increasing. One such example is that in the last few years, Linux containers and container orchestration like Kubernetes is really becoming popular. So what that means is that not only do you have to do a lot of the popular types of scans like static scan and dynamic scans and SCA or software composition scans, but also now you need to scan these containers, and you also need to scan your Kubernetes cluster for potential security issues. So you may require some additional vendor tools that you need to integrate with in order to do these additional types of checks. So the number of tools keeps increasing, which is a problem for a lot of organizations. And GitLab is really strategizing this idea of consolidating a lot of your application security scans. And on the screen, I have a screenshot from a sample GitLab CI/CD pipeline. So for those of you that are not familiar with GitLab, but maybe familiar with other CI/CD tools like Bamboo or Jenkins, may recognize the structure where basically a pipeline is a series of sequential and parallel steps that define the overall build process and deployment process for your project. And in this case, we on the left-hand side, we see a build step, and then in the test step, we see a couple of different items, one after the other. And those are meant to be sort of parallel steps, right? So the build, test, review, those steps kind of are sequential. They run one after the other. But within the test phase, we are looking at an example of GitLab running different types of application security checks like container scanning, dependency scanning, open source license scanning, and static scanning in parallel to save time. And all of these different types of checks and scans are built into GitLab. So GitLab is one of the very few tools that has an exhaustive list of scans built in. And even if you are using both GitLab as well as Jira software, they have excellent integrations, which is documented both on the GitLab side as well as on the Jira side. So for example, if you have a pipeline like this that runs all of these different security scans within GitLab, GitLab can automatically create Jira issues in a very similar way that we talked about earlier with other tools like Barracuda and Nexus IQ. Now, when it comes to customer preference, we see a split, right? Some customers don't want to centralize into a single tool. So they would prefer to have different tools that perform different functions and just integrate them together, whereas others may prefer to consolidate a lot of the tools and reduce the number of tools. So it really, again, depends on your organization's needs and preference, but something I'd like to highlight. So I think I kind of try to touch upon a couple of different areas, but I just want to summarize the major takeaways. So the first takeaway is that the most effective way you can implement application security and DevSecOps in your organization is to run all of the possible types of application security and source code checks and scans as part of your CI/CD pipeline, rather than running it as a separate isolated process. And the goal is to automate. You want to reduce the time it takes to run these scans by parallelizing your scans and running them asynchronously, as well as you want to avoid any kind of manual tasks in terms of running the scans themselves. Your effort needs to be around analyzing the results of these scans, and ideally these results should directly go to your developers within Jira software, since that's where their backlog already is for the development work. And remediating security issues as part of the DevSecOps ethos should be a standard part of the development backlog. So that's the best place to integrate all of these findings. And if you have the option to consolidate some of these tools, you should also look at those opportunities as well. So that was it in terms of the content I had. Not sure if you have any time for Q&A, but yeah.
Yes, we definitely have time for a Q&A. So thanks, Himanshu, for the presentation. So as you said, right, it's becoming big now. It's something that all firms have to implement. So in terms of Q&A, any folks want to ask questions? I didn't see any questions in the chat, but feel free to unmute your mic and ask a question. All right, while we wait for anyone else, I do have one question here. I'll start off here.
Sure.
First question is, when we talk about security scans, what have you seen is the common one to get started? What type of security scan do folks do? I mean, you gave the example of the third-party libraries, right? And I think I think I saw something with Veracode, some of the big ones, right? So what would you suggest as a good starting point to get the implementation in for your team?
Exactly. So the big three categories that you really cannot skip. The first is static analysis that I spoke about, and then tools like Veracode can do that, as well as this built into GitLab. The second is open source dependency scanning, also sometimes known as software composition analysis, or analyzing the software bill of materials, where you're analyzing the libraries that you're using, especially open source libraries. And when it comes to open source libraries, it's not just the security of the library and the code itself, but also you have to be very careful about open source licenses. So a lot of developers have the misconception that just because something is open source means that you can integrate it into your work project. But that's a pretty major misunderstanding, because open source projects typically have some kind of software license associated with it. So for example, there are super permissive licenses like the MIT license, which basically say do whatever you want. There is no liability to the company or the developer for using it. Whereas there are more restrictive licenses like the open source GPL license. And in some cases, the licenses say that if you integrate our library in your project, you have to open source your entire project.
Correct, yeah.
Which obviously could be an issue with the legal and the policy department of your organization. So these big three are sort of like you really cannot skip, and everything else kind of builds up from there, especially depending on things like are you deploying to the cloud, are you deploying with containers and Kubernetes. There are specific kinds of checks you can do for those.
Got it. Oh, great. Thanks. So it's good. A good way to get started for folks here. Okay. Any other questions do we have from the audience? Wow, quiet group today. Very surprised. Very surprised. All right. If there's any questions, I'll ask one more question then.
I think Arav is trying to ask a question.
Oh. Yeah. I'm just curious. It's your presentation is all about Atlassian stack, so it's all Bamboo, Bitbucket, all that stuff. So I use, or my org uses TeamCity, SonarQube, but we're also like, how would you envision in like adding other systems like DevOps into this, like inject that into Jira and have scanning, or did you talk about that yet?
Well, I mean, one of the points that I've tried to put across is that the example I give, especially sort of the diagram that I showed, is more of a framework that you can adapt for any tool. So for example, so even within TeamCity, you can create a pipeline of sequential and parallel steps, right? So similar to the GitLab pipeline, screenshot that I have on the screen right now. So as part of your test phase, you can run all of the different scans and checks that are available. For example, even SonarQube, right? And SonarQube, in fact, has all integrations with Bitbucket as well as with Jira software if you're using one of those tools. But the SonarQube scan itself should run as part of your test phase of within TeamCity or whatever CI/CD tool you use. And also the other thing is a lot of these tools have integrations with Jira software. So that's pretty universal. And even if you find a tool that doesn't have a direct integration with Jira software, you can use the API that your scanner may have, as well as Jira software has a very robust REST API that you can then integrate as part of some custom scripts within your pipeline.
Oh, sorry. Or is this example mostly is on cloud or on-prem or a combination?
So the diagram in terms of the architecture, you can implement this anywhere, whether it's cloud, on-prem, or even a mix of those tools. So for example, Veracode does not run on-prem; it runs on the cloud. But your other tools like Jira software and GitLab or Bamboo could be on-prem. So you can even have a hybrid setting as long as they can communicate with each other. And typically, they just use the standard REST API to communicate with each other. It should suffice in terms of building out the integration that works.
Yep. So our efforts right now is to figure out where we move from cloud or data center, but we're having issues trying to port those customizations to cloud, which is why I'm trying to figure out what our best options are here. That's
exactly, and that's definitely a major challenge, especially because a lot of those tools just have it's completely new paradigm, right? So for example, going from Bamboo to Bitbucket Cloud, it's practically a different type of CI/CD tool. Bamboo has some more classic features, whereas Bitbucket Cloud has modern pipeline features.
Got it.
But the logic should translate for the most part. But yeah, definitely, I acknowledge that there can be some major challenges.
You'd be surprised some of the functions that goes on here, but that's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Great, thanks for asking that question. Any other questions, folks? All right, I will then ask one last question here.
Sure.
So GitLab. So tell us, is that something that's becoming pretty popular? You did mention that it is something that you see that you had a lot more features than some of the other cloud offerings.
Exactly, and GitLab, I think, is standing out in a couple of different categories. One is, it has modern CI/CD pipeline built in. The other is it's one of the very few tools that has natively built a lot of these application security scans and checks. Although you have to subscribe to like a higher tier to get some of these features, it may not be available in the low and free tiers. And then also, even in terms of automating the deployment by following modern continuous deployment techniques, they have some pretty unique features built in. So it makes for a pretty powerful combo of features. And even on the Atlassian Open DevOps initiative and a few other examples on the Atlassian side, you will see that even Atlassian themselves does acknowledge that yes, GitLab, the customers could be using GitLab. However, Atlassian tries to integrate with GitLab, especially on the Jira Software side. And even on the GitLab documentation, if you will find a lot of reference to Atlassian tools, especially Jira Software. So I think it's mutually acknowledged, both on the customer and Atlassian and GitLab side. And in terms of our enterprise customers, we are seeing a lot of customers, especially move away from Jenkins as their CI/CD tool of choice. And the number one, I think, replacement for Jenkins that we're seeing now is probably GitLab.
Wow, that's great. Good insight. Thank you. Okay, folks, if there are no any other questions, thank you, Himanshu, for a great presentation. And I think he will be here till the end here to answer any more questions that you have for folks here. All right, great. So before we get on to the second speaker here, just a quick ask here. Any new folks who have joined kind of for the first time and feel comfortable introducing themselves? Maybe just to talk about what kind of work you do with Atlassian, how you found out about the group. Just again, no pressures. If anyone wants to kind of unmute and speak, this is your chance here. Just want to give a chance again, just to kind of network here and meet folks in person, or meet folks virtually since we can't meet in person. All right, a small group and a very shy group as well. If I offered some prizes, will that incentivize anyone?
Even for previous winners? No?
All right. I think we will then move on then. Like I said, maybe we'll get some more folks to kind of speak up at the end there. And let's go to informal here. All right, so let's get on to our second presentation. So we have, we're kind of very lucky to have Daniel, who's a kind of community engineer from Atlassian, to kind of speak about kind of the Jira and Confluence cleanup for the summer. So if you need any more summer projects, he has some ideas for you. So take it away, Daniel.
Zoom chat up in the side here so you can see. Great. My teammates have just said there's a thunderstorm headed this way. So if I drop out, please let me know in the chat. The internet here has been known to disappear during thunderstorms. But yes, as we get going here, I would like to kind of talk a bit about the past. Think back to the year 2015. Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt was appearing on Netflix for the first time. We were about to get our first taste of Disney's vision of Star Wars with Episode 7, the first George Lucas-less movie coming out in the Star Wars universe. SpaceX, for the first time that year, launched and landed a Falcon 9 rocket. And this is like a big shift in space travel. Before that, like you launched a rocket and you threw it away. And so landing it and reusing it was a big deal. Having a cheap rocket that you could use over and over again really cut down on costs. At the same time that year, I was optimizing the monitoring services in my job as a systems administrator. I was looking at inexpensive system monitors with configurations that I could use across multiple systems. I would tune the alerts, make sure the right things were being monitored and the right people were getting notified when they were down. It's at that time I discovered some of the alerts were going to people that didn't even work at the company anymore. And of course, that's a big problem if the systems went down. Not only did spending time cleaning the alerts make sure the right people were actually informed, but I was able to standardize the monitoring and save the company $12,000 a year. Fast forward a bit, and I'd written an article on the Atlassian community called Spring Cleaning for Jira. That article was like a culmination of my tips for taking the same cleanup and optimization mindset to Jira over the course of a couple of years. Now I'm a full-time Atlassian, and once I came inside Atlassian, the company, we picked up that guide and expanded on those tips. So now we have official Atlassian documentation with a strategy for cleaning up Jira, Confluence, and Bitbucket. We've called it very unpretentiously Cleanup Guide. While I can't promise these tips will save you $12,000 a year, I can tell you that cleaning up your Jira and Confluence instances following these tips will help speed things up under the hood for you. Will reduce complexity so that you can do a more effective job as an administrator. Your team can do work faster, and your company can save enough time to watch more space launches. I love space stuff, don't you? The time you spend on cleanup work isn't throwaway time. Tidy instances ensure that people can find what they need, users can get issues and pages faster, and you can spend less time configuring projects and spaces. Anytime you can save for end users fast, especially the more users you have, the more time you've saved. The first thing you're going to want to do before starting the work is getting buy-in. First up, there's probably your manager. You're going to need to scope out the cleanup work, either whether it's on your server or on your cloud site, and that's going to take some time to do. Depending on your manager's style, you can choose how to frame the request. Technical debt is a thing that occurs when someone takes an easy solution instead of spending more time on a better approach. So past choices in application administration may have led to technical debt. And just like real debt, it's a good idea to pay that down when you have the means. You could maybe also mention the efficiency gains you might get as an administrator, or for your end users, the speed boost they'll get when they're using your applications. Later on, once you've identified some cleanup areas, you'll need to get buy-in from other stakeholders like project leads or space administrators in Confluence. Letting your manager know up front is going to help you get set up for success, because you might need an advocate to help get buy-in from those external people. So let's start with one that can save you money. Unused license seats can be recovered pretty easily, and that has a direct impact on costs. Deactivating users helps people find the right person easier in user pickers, those little drop downs when you're changing the assignee or looking to mention someone, and keeps your security team happy, since unused accounts can pose a security problem. Atlassian support provides SQL queries for identifying the last login date of users on each of our supported database types like MySQL, Postgres. You might opt for the SQL queries since you can do them for free on server and data center instances, like, no cost involved. And you have the tools available to you since all you need is a SQL client. You could put together scripts that check for users who haven't logged in say more than 6 months, and set an alert based on that. The alert would be your indicator as an administrator to look more closely at what's happening. Is this person using their application license? Have they gone on parental leave? Do they get all their information from other systems that consolidate reports? Or maybe have they even left the company? If you've got Crowd Data Center will show you all the licensing information for all of the Atlassian products you have connected to it if you're using Crowd as your identity provider. This is a really good way to manage your applications if you've got multiple Atlassian products in your system. And there are many apps on the marketplace that help with user management. The apps can do things like report on users who are in specific groups in the applications, deactivate those groups at once, make suggestions on what users should be inactivated by their last login activity, or automatically disable users who haven't logged in within a certain period. Some examples of apps like these are license and user deactivator for Jira, active user filter, user management for Jira, and optimizer for Jira. On the cloud side of things, Atlassian Access is the preferred method of user management. The admin console on cloud allows you to manage users across products quickly and easily. User details in the admin console show when a user last used applications, so you can quickly see which product licenses might be unused for particular people. Atlassian Access supports SCIM, so you can also integrate with an external identity provider such as Okta, Azure AD, Google Cloud, and the like. You can use an external identity provider to manage application access through groups. And there are also a few apps on the marketplace that can manage user subscriptions for Jira and Confluence Cloud specifically. But given that you may have other apps such as Status Page on your cloud site, managing users through the admin console is the recommended method of handling user access. And if your site has specific requirements, you can also leverage the organizations and user management APIs to write custom scripts. Apps are an area where it's possible to realize direct cost savings. The marketplace has thousands of apps to fit the thousands of individual needs across companies. And so instead of giving you specific advice for apps to activate, I'm going to give you some general principles to evaluate the app usage at your company. First, you're going to want to do some discovery. If you don't already have one, you should make a Confluence page listing all the apps that are installed on all your instances. Document known use cases for the app in your company, who the primary users of the app are, and what functionality the apps provide. This might help you find some obvious wins. For example, you might not need that SharePoint integration app anymore if your company has already migrated off SharePoint. Knowing what apps do can also help you consolidate duplicate functionality. Apps like Script Runner, Enhancer plugin, Optimizer, MISC workflow extensions, and the like have lots of functionality inside the app. You might find that you can move usage of one or two niche apps to one of these larger apps and cut down on an app install. Or on the flip side, you might find that having a large all-in-one app that's only being used for a small specific function could be done with a less expensive and smaller app. On cloud, your site gets the latest version of any marketplace apps. But on server and data center, you choose what to upgrade and when. So you should start an upgrade log and keep track of any app upgrades you make. This is another Confluence page that you're going to want to create if you don't already have it. Then you can cross-reference the upgrade log with your app directory page, and you can note any special testing needed for apps during a version upgrade. Then upgrade those apps on the staging environment first to make sure everything acts normal. When you go to do your production upgrades, say once a month or so, or once a quarter, depending on your company's cadence, you can check that you're upgrading to the same versions you tested on in staging and make sure that those are also the same versions you have documented on your upgrade log page. This comes in really handy if someone comes to you a week later and complains something is broken. You've got a reference to see exactly what apps were changed, what they do, and the previous version numbers if you have to roll one of those apps back. Having this page makes your admin life easier and paints a fuller picture of the app usage across your instance. Let's talk about a couple searchable parts of apps in the applications. On the Jira side, you can get the usage of apps that provide workflow objects. That's conditions, validators, and post functions. The app keys are stored in the database in the workflow descriptors where the apps are used. So if you're on server or data center, you can use SQL to parse out which apps are used in your workflows. An easier app that helps provide this information directly to you is called Admin Toolbox for Jira, and it in the Jira interface can show you which workflows have app usage inside them. On Confluence, apps that provide macros are stored in page content. So no matter your deployment type, cloud, server, data center, you can search for pages that have specific macros in the Confluence search. Details about the macro usage is also listed in general configuration macro usage in Confluence's administration, so that you can see which pages the macros are used on. And as a bonus, this page also tells you if there are any user installed apps that provide macros which aren't used at all. Again, that app to help with Jira workflows was called Admin Toolbox for Jira. So you should always test configuration or data changes in a development or staging environment before you make changes in your production server. Lay out your expectations before you make the change, then test to ensure you've achieved those outcomes and not affected other items you weren't intending to. Document the steps you took to make those changes while testing. The best time to do it is actually before you start testing, so you can follow the steps. Take backups before you make changes in production, and then follow the change document you made step by step when you were doing your testing. This isn't cleanup specific guidance. This is just good practice to always follow. Let's talk about archiving now. This is one of the key areas people tend to think about when they hear the word cleanup. We're literally talking about putting stuff we've done out of sight. That's not to say we're deleting anything, but instead saying, yeah, we finished that project, we finished that thing. Now we don't need to see it unless there's a specific need to go back to it. You can think of archiving like putting items in a storage unit. They're not on your desk or in your office anymore, but you didn't throw them in a dumpster. In Jira Data Center and Cloud Premium, this is really easy to do. Just select the archive action for individual projects from the project list. You'll be able to see archive projects from the archive projects list on the left, as well as what user archived it and on what date. As Jira admins or specific project admins, you can archive inactive projects along with all the issues, components, attachments, and versions inside them. This won't affect associated schemes, workflows, issue types, or any content that is shared with other projects. Issues in archive projects won't appear in a basic or advanced search. You can access these issues through direct issue links, but you can't edit them anymore. They're read-only, and they'll also be removed from the search index. Specific to Jira Data Center, you can also archive individual issues. This is helpful on long-running projects like your IT help desk to keep using the project while removing old issues from the index. You still get all the benefits of the project archive just at the individual issue level. The issues are read-only, and they will only appear if someone clicks on a direct link to the issue. They won't be queryable. They won't show up in reports. They won't show up on dashboards. They won't be viewable in the Jira Service Management queues or portals. And in Jira software, they'll no longer appear on Scrum or Kanban boards. You can export all archived issues to a CSV file if you need to audit them later, or you can even restore the issues if you need to. It's possible to do project archiving in Jira Server, but the options and setup are a little more complicated. Atlassian's found through its research that companies that really these feature sets are typically at the enterprise level. They're either migrating to Jira Data Center or utilizing Cloud Premium. It is still possible to get some of the performance benefits of non-indexed projects in Jira Data Server, since the issue set that's included in the index is where you're going to get your performance hit. But I would suggest, go on Atlassian community to ask for specific advice after reading some of the cleanup strategies there. Because you might find that migrating to Jira Data Center or Jira Cloud is possibly a preferable route to going through specific cleanup for issues in Jira Server. On Confluence, one of the easiest ways to find spaces that need archiving is by using Confluence's analytics feature, which is built into Cloud Premium and Confluence Data Center. You can view issue usage statistics for an entire space over time, or drill down into specific pages. While analytics are built in for Cloud Premium and Confluence Data Center, you can also use the View Tracker app for the same purpose on Confluence Server or Cloud Standard. Once you've identified a space that's not used, you can archive it from the space settings. Just flip to the Archive Space tab and look at the status dropdown in Data Center or Server, or if you're on Cloud, just click that Archive Space button. The pages will still be there, links will still work, but the space won't show up in the space directory unless you switch to the Archive tab, and pages from the space won't appear in searches unless you actually click Archived Spaces in your search results options. A key difference between Confluence and Jira here is that archived content remains in the search index. The performance boost on the Confluence side is purely a people thing. It ensures that only relevant content is shown in search results. As your site grows, search becomes really vital to finding content, and archiving the old content makes it easier for people to find what they're after. In Confluence Cloud, you can also archive individual pages for the same result. You can do this from the page itself using the More Actions menu in the top right, or on the left sidebar in the page tree. Double check that the page doesn't have inherited view restrictions, because when you archive a page, the restrictions from a parent don't carry over, so you could accidentally expose a page that had hidden parent restrictions. In Cloud Premium, you can also archive pages in bulk, including their nested children. You can archive up to 500 pages at once. The archived pages, not just if you do pages rather than the space, are viewable from the Archive Pages section over on the left sidebar all the way at the bottom. What you've just seen for Confluence archiving pages is for Cloud, the spaces or the individual issue page level archiving is for Cloud. If you need page level archiving on Server or Data Center, there are apps on the Atlassian Marketplace that can help you archive or even implement a content lifecycle management if that's something you need to do. Now for attachments. You might say, like, this is the most impactful area because attachments are the largest users of space. On paper, that probably sounds right, but in actuality, attachments don't really have a large impact on application performance in Jira and Confluence. In the age of cheap disks and cloud storage, they also don't really have a significant impact on dollar because disk is pretty cheap. Where this really is going to trip you up is migration, because moving to cloud requires you to upload all those attachments, and moving to data center might require you to copy from your server instance across your network onto an NFS storage device. Depending on your backup processes, reducing the attachment size might also speed up the time it takes to run a backup. For server and data center, the attachments are all stored on disk on the server. And so regular file management tools are really the best way to check for large attachments. I like a tool called NCDU. It's easy to navigate. It's available on pretty much everything. You might have to install it from the system's package manager, but literally it's available on everything. I run it on my home router. The exception being Windows, unless you install the Windows subsystem for Linux. On Windows, I prefer a tool called WinDirStat, although there are many other good tools available. You probably know one yourself. Jira attachments on disk are stored in the project folders and then issue folders. So the structure goes that way. The Confluence attachments are really obfuscated when you go into the folder directory. So we do have instructions online for kind of reversing how the attachments are hashed. But you can also use Confluence's space tools, content tools, space attachments options. That's at the individual space level to see which attachments in spaces are the largest. You can sort those by size interface. On cloud, standard plans currently offer 250 gigabytes of storage per product. So that's, Confluence gives you 250 gigabytes. Jira software gives you 250 gigabytes. Jira Service Management gives you another 250 gigabytes. And on the premium enterprise plans in cloud, you get unlimited storage. So the default maximum attachment size being 100 megabytes in cloud, and having a separate microservice in the backend that handles media means I really wouldn't worry about attempting attachment cleanup if you're already in cloud. There's not really going to be a big performance gain. Okay, we've talked about some of the most impactful cross-product things, stuff that goes Jira and Confluence, but let's talk about some of the things that affect just Jira or just Confluence. Depending on how deep you want to get in the weeds with cleanup, you might just stop here. But we're going to talk about some of these to make sure you're aware of what else you can clean up and see what that might impact. So I have a little pop quiz. Just in the chat, someone look at this screenshot and tell me what is wrong in the screenshot here. While you look, I'm gonna get it. Correct, yes, multiple. Yes, I see 2 correct answers here right away. Oh, 3, wow, yes, exactly. Look at all those due date fields, multiple custom fields for similar purposes. Varying date fields, yes, that's exactly right. We've got 4 date fields on the screen with really similar names and only 1 context each. These are all globally configured. So every issue in Jira has these 4 date fields available when we probably could have gotten away with 1. So that's 4 times as many fields getting indexed by Jira Search Indexer than actually need to be. We should remove any unused instances of fields like this and merge any of the fields that we can. Date and dates is particularly egregious to me because it is the same thing. But it's worth really going through the whole custom field list to look for duplicates. This can be caused by bad practice. For example, an administrator who's creating custom fields, not looking for custom fields with similar names before they create a new one. Or, you may have widely given Jira administrator rights away, and someone who was coming in, not even thinking to look for duplicate custom fields, just created a new project and 40 new fields to go with it. Apps like Script Runner or Power Admin can help merge duplicate custom field values together, while apps like Optimizer for Jira can help you identify completely unused ones and remove them. We've also added an issue counter in Jira Data Center 8.16 and above, along with a last update column for these custom fields. So let's talk about context real quick. Jira Data Center 8.16 and above also include a custom fields optimizer tool. This will scan the issues and contexts in your instance to determine which custom fields can be optimized. If, for example, a field was only used in a few projects, the optimizer will look at it and suggest changing the context to scope down the projects instead of being global. If the context is just a few projects, the indexer does not have to index those custom field values for the rest of the projects in your site. If the field is being used in more than 10 projects, the optimizer says, yes, it's actually probably a global field. One gotcha here is that the optimizer won't scan archived issues. So if you're needing to restore archived issues or projects, you may run into a situation where the optimizer has scoped down those fields and you're trying to restore issues with custom field values that are no longer there. But there are also a plethora of apps on the marketplace that help scope the field values and context for server and cloud if you don't happen to be on data center 8.16 or above. One thing you definitely should hit is the resolution field. This is global everywhere, Jira server, data center, and cloud. There are ways that you can make the resolutions fewer in value by using the workflow editor. But I would say if the list isn't already short, if you don't have few enough values that can fit on the screen, then possibly you had too many Jira administrators in the past and they decided to create their own resolutions and didn't need to. So if you use the resolutions page in Jira's administration, you can see all the options that you might see in a resolution dropdown. But if you click on delete on any one of those, Jira will tell you how many issues currently have that resolution and ask you to choose another resolution from the list to change all those issues over to. So that's pretty handy, but it's worth calling out if you have any JQL filters that use those resolution values, those filters are not going to work right anymore. So I would say the built-in Jira integrity checker can help point you towards some items that might need your attention. It's not all encompassing, but to get the most out of cleanup, you should take a look at some of the offerings on the Atlassian Marketplace. There are apps that help find unused fields, resolutions, workflows, filters, issue links, and much more. These apps can make recommendations or take action for you right away. And again, I always say, make sure you test things on a staging environment before you make changes in production. But these apps can save you a lot of time and they're well worth investigating if you're serious about keeping your Jira instance cleaned and tuned. Great example of this, I just mentioned resolution fields and filters. Some of these apps will, when they suggest scoping down resolutions, at the same time, they will search your filters and find if those resolutions are used and correct them right away. On the Confluence side of things, Confluence spaces have individual trashes that can be emptied. When you delete a page or attachment in Confluence, it doesn't disappear right away. It's still in the database and you can still come back and restore it. To empty a spaces trash, you can go to the space tools, then in content tools, and then the trash tab. You can purge individual pages, or you can click purge all to remove all the pages at once. That permanently removes the object from Confluence and recovers the database storage. Synchrony is the service that saves Confluence's real-time editing data. Every keystroke in Confluence is saved by Synchrony. This can make the database table for Synchrony grow pretty quickly if you've got a lot of people making a lot of edits. Confluence 7 and up have scheduled jobs to keep the size of this database under management, and in cloud, of course, we take care of that for you. But it is possible to force a hard eviction of that table once or even on a regular basis if the database table seems to be growing too large. Hopefully you don't ever really need to do this, but knowing it's possible can come in handy in a pinch if you're noticing some performance issues with your database. Okay, and this is the end of my slides, but really this is just scratching the surface of what's possible to clean up or optimize in your Jira and Confluence instances. After you scope out the work you're going to take on and set your success criteria, you'll want to keep on top of tidying up so you don't have another large cleanup project in the future. I always recommend making sure the right people have application administrator access. That helps keep errant spaces and projects and fields from being created. And you're going to want to revisit cleanup every 6 to 12 months for a little bit in order to make sure things are not growing unbounded again. If you need help later on, I'd say the community is a great place to look and ask questions and get advice. That's where I'm answering questions, and you can find me there. Right, let's hit some questions. I'm going to read back through the chat real quick, but feel free to unmute.
Thank you, Daniel. I think the first thing to do is to strangle all the old Jira admins and lock down the Jira admin access, it seems.
Yes.
Like that's the first thing. All right, folks, any questions? Again, I don't see any questions in the chat for Daniel, but again, feel free to kind of unmute your mics there and just feel free to ask. Araf, go ahead.
Yeah, you started the presentation saying you need to list all the apps in a Confluence page, but that's a static page, right? Like it's just a one and then like.
Yes. Oh, so yeah, the app discovery page. How I would structure this is your group, like maybe as the Confluence or Jira administrator, or maybe like an Atlassian administration group, you probably have your own space. I would just include this with your administration pages for Jira and Confluence and any architecture you have about those. It would be one page with maybe a table is a good example. It lists the app name and a point of contact, like who asked you to install that app and what it does. This doesn't have to be super crazy. Like obviously you can always go to the apps page, the manage apps page in the application to see what apps are currently installed. But this page that you put together yourself tells you why, like what does that app do and who asked you to purchase it.
Okay, so I was actually, so all that information is in our Jira tickets because we track all the changes there, but we don't have.
Oh, that's great.
Well,
yeah.
No.
So that's even a step up from
well,
doing
no,
a Confluence
because
page.
it's all over, like all over tickets, right? So like the Confluence page, where I'm hoping to consolidate that information directly to one page, so it's almost real-time updates. But I'm actually curious because,
so
sorry, go ahead.
In that case, oh yes. Well, if you've got it in Jira, you're already halfway there to having a page that does this. What I would do is like just add a label, perhaps to your Jira issues, and then you can use a Jira issue macro, and display the information there. Who the reporter was, that was probably the person asking for it. The app name is probably the summary.
Yep, actually, the label idea makes sense. Cool, thank you.
I guess one thing that we can bring up as just a short story is we every 3 months we'll go through like an audit of accounts and active and inactive accounts. And the one thing that we actually encountered is we use Atlassian Access, and we actually weren't giving it an active attention. So we had accounts that were inactive, but were still part of our licensing for the Atlassian Access side. So we realized we need to give attention to there as well to ensure that we're not hitting a cap. And a lot of our inactive users are still part of our Atlassian Access account. So that's just one thing to raise to everyone as they're going through their user access, to make sure that their Atlassian Access platform is also a one-to-one match. Mm-hmm.
I got another question here for Daniel. So in terms of kind of the mess that you see, I guess in terms of what you clean up, right? Mm-hmm. What's kind of a usual cause? What are some of the preventive things you could do?
Yeah, the biggest is when people are starting as Jira administrators. My first recommendation is always determine who else is on your team and restrict administration to those people. Because well-meaning people have probably been given application administrator in the past, just so they can create their projects or whatever. Maybe it's a Scrum Master or something like that. But those people probably have not been trained in Jira or Confluence administration. They don't know best practices. And so they unintentionally create a bunch of stuff that you're going to have to come back and clean up later. That's the biggest thing. I would say in cloud, it's a bit different now. We have team managed projects versus company managed projects in Jira. That was formerly known as Next Gen if you've been on cloud for a long time. And those provide a way to let people create their own projects without affecting the whole site, right? So when we talk about performance in Jira and having a bunch of custom fields, generally the problem is those fields are global. So when you run a search index, the indexer has to look through all of those fields. Maybe you're only using 3 or 4 on some projects, but you have a list of 150 custom fields, right? And it's got to go through all those, even if there's no value to index them. With team managed projects, the context is the project. So you don't have global contexts in that type of project on cloud.
So anybody, any user of Jira can create their own team managed project.
If you've not turned it off, you can disable team managed projects in cloud. Yes.
Okay. Before I got to my company, we had a Jira server instance, and when we migrated to the cloud while I was here, we've inherited a lot of bloat, as I call it. And you hit it right on the spot earlier with the custom fields, the date fields that are very similar to each other. So we're on the standard plan of cloud, not premium. So do you recommend, without having to invest a lot of money in apps, because when we do want to install an app, it has to go through a security review, needs review, things like that. So it takes time, but is there any way through API calls to get information on, let's say, unused custom fields, fields that have the same name or similar names? Also with workflows, what workflows are identical to each other, but with different names, things like that.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting point on workflows. When you have workflows, some of them can be active, like those are the ones you're using, and you'll often find many inactive copies. Like when you go to edit a workflow, it gives you the option of creating a copy first. So you'll end up with quite a few previous versions of workflows that way. Those inactive workflows don't cause any performance issues because they're simply just unused data. So that's a bonus in terms of performance, but and they are separated out as inactive down in the workflow administration page. But you may want to go through and remove those potentially. I would say you could probably do that from the administration page without using an app. There are some free apps. I would have a look on the marketplace and see. You might be surprised. Security review obviously is going to cause you some time setback, but pricing wise, some of these are actually quite affordable. And if you're considering using the Workflows API, for example, to download a list, go through it, and then either manually or automatically with a script kind of like prune those, you might find that the apps that kind of help you clean up are much, much cheaper than the time you'd even invest in writing a script to do that.
Sure. Thanks. That's good advice.
Hey, Daniel, I have a question. And that's again on the cleanup for dashboards and filters, because that's always problematic because they always tied to the permissions or the permissions for the person who creates those filters and dashboard. And many times person leave, filters and dashboard remains there, people are unable to access. I've been into time where some people had created the public filters, which you want to avoid, right? And at a later point, but the person is no more there. And so you cannot turn off the public filter until you change that public to private, and you cannot change it because the person or the creator is no longer there. So dashboards and filters, I always find problematic because they are tied to the person who creates, and admins have very limited functionality for that. And also I would add one more thing is that the Confluence page restrictions, answer might be different for these two, but that's also in the same category because there also things are tied to the person who restrict the pages. So there is a chance, and that happens many times, that they don't give access to admins So even admins are not aware that what page has been restricted and they cannot do anything if the person left.
Right. Yes, that's a great point. So I'll talk real quick about the Confluence spaces first. One thing I didn't mention specifically was personal spaces. Obviously, when someone leaves a company, they have a space there. It's still there. So that's a great candidate for archiving. If they have not granted you permission, like if they've restricted that down to themselves, there is a group called Confluence administrators that you can add yourself to in Confluence to get kind of like super access, I suppose. Even if you haven't been granted permissions by them, by adding yourself to that group, you can still get access to that to change the permissions and then do what you will with the space. About the Jira dashboards and filters, the integrity checker that's built in will try and catch some of those things for you if the permissions are messed up, for example. There are quite a few apps. What's the name of the one?
Script Runner.
Yeah, Script Runner will definitely help you there. There's one that's a little narrow, like a lot of people have Script Runner, right? So that's a great one to use. You might not even need a security review for that if you've already got it installed.
My question
Power
is
Admin
related to cloud, because I'm a huge cloud customer. So yeah.
Yeah, aim towards cloud. Yes, so Script Runner should be able to do that stuff in cloud. I think Power Admin may have a cloud option. No, it does not. Yeah, Script Runner would be good then. There are a couple others. If you had a configuration manager for Jira, which is formerly a Botron app, I think AppFire just acquired them. That had its own integrity checker. The purpose of that app was to allow you to copy configurations from one server data center instance to another server or data center instance. And so as part of that, it would ensure that all the fields existed between those two instances. Mm-hmm. So they built their own integrity checker that does a lot of stuff. They spun out that separate integrity checker into an app called Power Admin, which is a lot smaller in scope, less expensive, that I really have found a lot of good use for in terms of like filters, permissions. Mm-hmm. It can kind of like check for problems that way, and also you can use it to modify problematic filters or dashboards.
Okay. Yeah, we'll give it a try to some.
Yeah, unfortunately, Power Admin doesn't have a cloud version, so I would say check if Script Runner can help.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you, folks. So we'll take a short break here. I know some folks may have some more questions, but we can wait till we want to do some raffles here first, and then we can kind of continue the discussion here afterwards. All right, so again, for the prizes, so thanks to our sponsors. So give me a second, I'll switch the screen here, and we can go to our raffle section here. But again, thank you, Daniel. All right, so again, so we don't have, as I say, we have about 6 prizes here. So kind of the $50 gift cards and $25 gift cards. Again, with a short, a small audience here, I think there's a great chance that you folks will win some prizes here. But before I get to the prizes, actually, no, let me do that afterwards here. Let's get the prizes, and I'll kind of talk another short announcement afterwards here. Okay, so we have our Wheel of Fortune here that will go in, and I will select some folks for the prize here. Give me 1 second. Share the sound here. All right, so again, this is just to all the winners, and unfortunately, Araf, you are not eligible here for today. Thanks for asking the questions. All right, so again, once you kind of your name is selected, please let us know that you're present. Is Elliot here? Oh, yes, Elliot, yes, congratulations. All right, if you can, just give your email address to one of the folks here, either Andrew, Couple, or Mother myself, and we will be able to send you the gift card here. So again, this was a $25 gift card.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, let's go on to the next one here. Really, congratulations. Are you still on?
Yes, I am. Thank
Okay,
you.
great. Okay, again, this is a $25 gift card. So again, I'll give your name, as I mentioned earlier, to one of us here. We'll email that to you. Okay, so we have another $25 gift card here. Howard, all right. We have your contact info. So again, as you said, you have to play to win, and Howard has to attend to win as well. So do that. All right, and then is another $25 gift card here. Andy, congratulations. Andy, are you online?
I'm here. Yeah.
All right.
Wow.
Right.
That's amazing.
Andy. Yes, thank you. And Andy, you know what? You had an old gift card that we never got to you. So we will give you a double gift card there. Well, it's an old swag card. So please give us your email address. All right, give us your personal email address. I think we never got the your Fidelity and your account information set up.
All right, I'm posting it in the chat. I don't mind if everyone knows it.
All right, great, thank you. All right, so the last two remaining, we have our $50 gift card from Blended and a $50 gift card from AdTech here. So let us see who wins this year. Megan, congratulations. Megan, are you there?
Yay.
All right, Megan.
I'm here.
All right, get your contact info. And then our last prize here. Samantha.
Yay.
Right, Samantha.
I'm here.
Great, Samantha. All right. Thank you, folks. Again, thanks to our sponsors, we will send you the big cards afterwards. Again, to AdTech, to Blended, to Major Key and eCore, who kind of sponsor our events here and keep this fun here. So obviously, get a lot of cool information, but also get some little prize here, a consolation here at the end as well. Okay. And then one last thing I wanted to do is just one announcement that Atlassian is doing. So some of the folks who are on community may have seen this posting. Atlassian is hosting something they call the Olympics. So again, this is obviously a play on the Olympics that are starting in Tokyo. And what they're having is they're basically having kind of like almost like a quiz contest, right? To test, as they say, your spirit and product knowledge. And so they have different communities set up. I guess different teams based on if you're a community leader, community member, Atlassian team member. So it starts on July 23rd. So again, I'll put the posting on the websites here. So if folks want to join, so again, it's a great way to connect, share, and learn. So this is something that they had asked us to give a shout out to. So again, if folks want to join in, go and sign up for that. Okay. All right. And that kind of concludes our formal presentation for this evening here. So again, feel free to chat. We have this space here till 7 p.m. If you ask any questions to speakers, I know Himanshu to run, but Daniel's still there. So please give any questions, or again, if you want to kind of ask any members of your community here as well, any questions, feel free to do so as well. Again, thank you. So I'm going to stop screen share here and just really open it for any questions.
I do have one for Dan. Anything, unless anyone wants have anything else, I can go in. Can I?
Go for it, Madhu.
Yeah. So Daniel, I have more of a philosophical question. So among all this cleanup that we do,